Hinduism, when you the loss of a life, it usually the belief after it is basically they either are reborn and the circle of life continues, or there is a concept of moksha where they are free from the cycle of life and they just transcend to another cosmic level of cosmic sphere rather. But growing up, at least personally, what I've understood is, or rather noticed in Indian households, especially in mine, from the moment I was born, it feels like there was a role that was scripted for me, and I was placed in that role to play a part. So I believed everything I was taught. I practiced all the rituals as told, and it was what I believed to be true. But the older I got, I started questioning a lot of these things. And in all honesty, this did burn a few bridges within my family. I started being uh, picked on, saying that why do you think so much? Why are you so narrow-minded? Which confused me. Where when I questioned things about religion, I was termed as narrow-minded, which is a bit ironic to me at least. But in our household, we had the practice of going to temples often. We believed in all the various gods listed out in the Hindu, uh, the from Ganesha, Krishna, Lakshmi, all of them. So, and we had the practice of conducting these different kind of pujas. We'd go to the famous temples at least once or twice a year, and this was my upbringing. So this kind of structured what my thought process was about religion. So I came to believe that there are different forms of God, that there are different types of God that are known for different kind of things. Ganesha, Krishna, Shiva, all of them. And to an extent, I did at that point in time believe. And but I do think that my reason for believing was not a personal journey that I took for myself, but it was because of the kind of role that I was placed on. Like my surroundings told me that this is what I have to believe in, and as a kid I did as told. But a little while later, as I grew up, I started questioning a few things. I had conversations with my mother from time to time saying that when we spend so much money on buying these kind of items or donating to a temple or conducting a puja, why not just use that money and give it to an orphanage or donate it to a charity that's doing some good work, or we ourselves use that money to try and uplift a few people who are in need of that kind of sort of extra help. And I was always given the answer that God has a process, God has a plan, and everyone will get what they deserve in that manner, and it would take its course. But in all honesty, at that point in time, I was not convinced with those answers. And then a huge incident happened in my life, something that changed everything about me. It changed my thought process, it changed my relationship with the different people in my life, it changed my relationship with the idea of faith and religion. And that was the loss of my older brother. So I was 16 years old at that time when my older brother, who was 8 years older than me, so I was born to two working parents. So my older brother was not just my brother, but also a parental figure in my life. And when I lost him, I lost all sense of understanding the reality of anything, in all honesty. I started questioning that we did everything as prescribed by the scriptures or whatever it is. I believed in God, I believed in all the different principles that I was taught. We did everything. We went to the temple, did the pujas, we did the rituals, everything. So why did I have to lose my brother at the age of 16? Why did a 24-year-old, 24, die of a heart attack in the middle of the night? At when that incident happened, no one had the answers to these questions that I was asking. And I know it's unfair of me to expect anyone to have those answers, but I wasn't rationally thinking about is it okay to ask the questions or not in that moment. I was furious because I was told constantly that believe these things, do this, and you will get good in life. And yet, even after doing it for 16 years, I had to lose my brother at the age of 16. And that made me furious. So, after this particular incident, I went through a very an atheist phase, in all honesty. I questioned who says that there's a God. Who can you prove it to me that there's a God? Because I seem to have proof for myself that there is no God. I did everything as told, and yet I still ended up losing my brother. So when I went through that atheist phase, that there is no God, it seems pointless to have any beliefs about these things. I was The reason I went through it was I was angry for sure. But during that atheist phase, I realized that I had lost my way. And in that point in time, I realized that I needed something to believe in. I, I personally thought I was being too full of myself to think that there is no sort of higher power or anyone above us, and that us humans or me as a person, is the ultimate form in my life. And I wasn't able to navigate through a lot of other emotions as well. This kind of anger and this mindset sort of took over me, and I wasn't able to go ahead with anything else. And I slowly started reading, and more than anything, I realized that I needed something to believe in. And I needed a sort of a concept or something to believe in to continue with life. But I had lost all my trust in the concept of God. And that's kind of when I ended up finding the route to spirituality. And so spirituality to me was basically like understanding that there is like a higher power, there is a sort of higher energy that connects us all. And the more sort of like started thinking on those lines, and I realized that that was something I could identify with more. And I was brought up as a religious child, but that wasn't because I personally believed it or that was my journey to it. It was because I was placed in that role and I had to think about those kind of things, is why I believed in all of those concepts. But when I went through grief, I realized that I have my own journey that I need to take. And I need to figure out what I believe in and what morals and principles I have in life and what it is that gives me any sort of solace. And I started I started identifying with the concept of energy more than anything else. Like I would feel more connected and in peace with myself when I looked at the moon and the stars than I did reading the Bhagavad Gita, which is our holy book. And the principles that were taught in the Bhagavad Gita, a few of them I still identify with now. Do no harm and wanting. There are a lot of morals that I've learned from the Bhagavad Gita. But for me, when I look at those kind of morals that I've learned, it's not something that I can find myself or rather convince myself that a God said that. So I'm not able to like kind of sort of conceptualize and say that there is a body that is called a God and the name of this God is so and so. It became more about, for me, about the concept of energy and the principle of believing. And when I say believing, I believe in things, I believe in concepts. When I say this, I mean thing phrases. As in a simple way to say it, I believe in phrases like on to better things, and concepts like peace begins with me. These things I felt more connected to than the scriptures, which is a bit odd to say, or maybe not odd to say, but I found myself drawn to these kind of concepts. I find myself being drawn to energies, good energies, and I truly believe that we're connected in that manner. that it's not just about what I think, but it's something that I'm experiencing in life. I feel like the moment I started identifying with the idea of energy, I started being more aware in my life, and I noticed a difference in me. I found myself drawn to people with a certain type of an aura and a certain type of energy, and I automatically connected with that kind of energy. And I do believe that the people that I have in my life right now, in my circle, who I'm in touch with all the time, it's because I've been drawn to them through energy. And I feel like we're all connected in some way or the other through a form of energy. And but I do believe, like, at the same time, there are certain principles that I was taught in my household that had nothing related to do with religion, that but might be something that my parents might have taught me, keeping in mind the religious aspect of it. But for me, I connected to it because of the compassionate idea of it. My mother has always taught me about taking care of people around me. And she has quoted principles about how different sort of gods took care of others, giving advice. And the Bhagavad Gita is about Lord Krishna giving detailed stories about and different lessons to Arjuna about the battle, during the battle. And I've connected with those words and those teachings that I continue to practice, not because of the source being religion, but because of what I was taught and how I connected with it, because of the compassionate idea of it. I believe, I empathize with the idea, and I try my best to live by those kind of principles. I believe in the concept of kindness. I believe in the concept of compassion. I That's the kind of mindset that I keep. But I also do think that my journey with my faith was about so in all if I were to put it plain and simple, just when I was starting to question things about the existence of God is when I lost my brother. And in that moment, it was a pivotal, it was a huge, huge milestone at that point. Because when I was questioning what was happening, why we do what, I was given a reason to think that they don't exist. Because I find it so difficult to understand that even after believing everything, doing everything with an open mind, and wholeheartedly practicing all the rituals expected of me, and listening to my parents about these different kind of stories, and yet I had to lose my brother when I was 16 to a heart attack when he was 24, that we still aren't exactly sure how it was caused. These kind of questions, the ambiguity of not knowing everything, it sort of it built the anger, and it built the foundation of why I questioned my faith in general. But my journey with grief, it's a long journey. Let's be honest, grief doesn't have any sort of finish line that you reach. It's a concept that we're going to go through our entire life. And I've always thought that when it comes to the idea of grief, we should try to look at it more about a coping perspective than a healing perspective. Because I personally think that when you go through grief, it's because you have lost something or someone that is extremely important to you. So you don't really get over it eventually or anything like that. And I've heard a lot of people tell me that time will heal, but I personally think that that statement sort of constricts us in our journey of grief, because it sort of gives an idea that there's a finish line, that there's some sort of time period after which I won't feel the same way that I did before. I lost my brother on Jan 31st, 2015. It's almost been 6 years, and yet I still have my bad days and good days. I still struggle with the idea that he's not here anymore. And for a good amount of time I felt that I was I had overcome the grief, and I had healed, that I was okay. And again, it was a few weeks later, a few moments later, there was some incident that triggered everything again. And when I recognized the idea that or rather acknowledged the concept that there's no sort of timeline for dealing with grief, is when I sort of, it started settling in me that I can get through this. I need to figure out how now. And when I decided that, okay, I need to figure out how to do it, it's when I realized that I needed something to believe in. So this was still when I was in that atheist phase where I decided that there's no God, there's no anything. I have nothing that I want to believe in. And it was very difficult to navigate any sort of thought or navigate anything in life at that moment. And that's when I found the idea of energies, and I started to identify more with that. And I sort of delved more into it, and I realized that it's a connected, it's a connected concept. Like, I truly believe that everything in my life right now is because of the way I have been attracted to that kind of energy. And when these kind of concepts started like settling into my head, I started practicing accordingly. But I really think it's so important that we highlight the fact that my journey with my grief and what it led to me finding what my faith was is very different, and it will never be the same for anyone else. We as human beings are all wired different, and because of that we all will have different journeys and different reactions. But and say when I say that, even though what happened happened, it changed my perspective of what my religion is, and whether I identify as religious or not. But it did not change for my family, like for my parents. And I think I've been lucky that my mother doesn't force me to practice the same sort of concepts and principles even now. And she's acknowledged that I have my own journey that I'm on. But at the same time, I try my best to accommodate, or rather go ahead and continue with a few practices, not because I'm not doing it because I think I'm obligated to, nor am I doing it just for the sake of doing it. Because in my view, when I am going to that particular temple that my mother truly believes in, it isn't because I'm doing it for namesake, nor is it because I'm doing it because I feel an obligation, but I'm doing it out of compassion for my mother. My mother believes in certain things, and she doesn't ask much of me when it comes to these kind of things anymore. But there are a few things that she feels very strongly about, that she truly believes. And for her, I do go. But I do this out of compassion and empathy for her. I might not have the same sort of connection to the ritual or to the god, but I still believe that I have that same sort of connection to her, and that energy from her, and that connectivity with her. And that's why I continue to go for things like this. And I think that if we were to practice the idea of having your own beliefs is one thing, and respecting other beliefs as well without forcing it, we would all have a sort of more peaceful kind of, a more peaceful time. Because in you get to practice what you need for your sense of peace, for your mental health, and at the same time you're allowing the person around you to be who they want to be. And this has always been something that I've been trying for the last couple of years. But I'll be honest, it's not easy. I've had my bad days. I've had days when I've been so frustrated with being asked to take part in a puja or take part in a event that's happening or whatever it is. So I'm from a South Indian state in India called Kerala. So we have the practice. We have an ancestral home. So from our parents' side, our mother's side, and our father's side, we have an ancestral home. So every year at our ancestral home, we have something known as a Teyam. A Teyam is basically a religious event. It's usually a 2 or 3 day sort of celebration, puja, folk dance, whatever you want to call it. And this is something that my parents strongly believe in, but I don't. I find it I don't have that sort of connection that they do. And at on my worst of days, I have had monumentally huge fights at home saying that I don't want to go. I don't believe it. Why do you force me? But in that moment is when I realized that when I had to be more mindful about the fact that my faith I had started questioning when I lost my brother, when I was dealing with the grief. And at the same time, I had to be mindful about the fact that my parents have also lost their son. They are also going through the process of grief. And if that particular attending that particular event, taking part in that ritual is something that helps them cope with their grief, I should help them in that manner, because I preach the concept about having your own journey with grief. But if I refuse to allow someone else to have that journey with grief, I'm a hypocrite. And even though I might not completely believe in everything which I have been brought up with as a Hindu in this household, there are still certain principles that I do believe in. And above all of it, I do think about the concept of compassion and kindness and allowing them that space for them to have their journey with their faith and me having my own journey with my faith. I don't think I'm not invalidating what I feel. I'm not invalidating my own journey to reach spirituality or the concept of energies, nor am I invalidating them for still believing, even though what happened. And this was something that it took me a bit time. I'm ashamed to say that it took me so many years to realize how important it was to give space for others to have their journey and for me to take my time with my journey. So that's how I came to the idea that I didn't I mean, in all honesty, I was already in the point of where I was questioning my faith. I was questioning what religion is, what God is, because I, religion, the idea of it became so perverse, as in, I felt it was more about promoting an agenda more than the idea of believing something that gives one a sense of peace. And then I lost my brother and I just started questioning it. Why? When we did everything as told, why did I have to lose him? And at that point, I turned atheist, and but I couldn't figure anything out. I needed something to believe in. So I slowly found the idea of energy. And that's how I've been feeling connected with up until now. Now, grief uh, has this huge impact on everything in our life. And at least in my life, it did. So it changed everything that I had in my life. It changed what I thought about with faith. It changed my relationship with my parents. It changed my relationship with the people around me. And above all, it changed my relationship with myself and it changed me, because I lost the biggest part of my life at that moment. And I kept wondering, how do I go ahead? And also, why do I go ahead? And when these kind of thoughts kept repeating in my head, I realized that in that moment is when I realized that I needed something to believe in, that I needed an idea or a concept that helped me make sense of what was going on, about why I lost someone, how I lost someone, if I'm ever going to see them again. And but at that point I was too angry and too I was too far the away from the idea of God at that moment. Like it had I any sort of leeway that I had, it was gone. I couldn't segue back to the idea of that there is a God that is looking over me. And I started identifying with the idea of there is a higher power, And I believe this now, that I do think there is a higher power that connects us all. But to me, that higher power, I cannot identify as one God. I can't identify with the scriptures and the different sort of mantras and prayers that were practiced, but I can identify with the energy from people and from nature. I feel more when I look at the moon, and I can look at the stars, and I feel like we're a small part of what the actual universe is, but we're all connected through different kinds of energies. And this was basically what happened with me. So my journey basically took me, I personally think that I was on a journey to realize that spirituality and understanding the concept of energy was something that would have eventually happened to me. Maybe it wouldn't have happened to me as soon as it did now if my brother didn't die when I was at 16 years old. But that's kind of the reality with with grief and with the loss. It sort of forces you to, it changes everything, and you are forced to actually face those changes in your life inside you. And that's what happened with me. That's kind of how I came to the idea, and how I reconnected with the idea of faith. I mean, my faith is in the concept of energy and being connected. I now personally identify as spiritual rather than religious. But at the same time, I respect that my parents and my family are still religious, and in every possible way, I'm trying my best to support their ideals. At the same time, I've been lucky that I'm being given space for my own journey as well. But yeah, that's basically what I wanted to share with you all today.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm wondering if you could also tell us a little bit about the podcast that you founded, and sort of the context of creating this space to talk about mental health, and have a kind of an open conversation about coping with grief.
Yeah, of course. So I started Mind Matters first as a blog, and in frankness, when I started the blog, I just assumed that the maximum number of people that would see it is probably 5 to 6 people from my own friend circle, the people that I talk to on an everyday basis. I'm just going to make them read what I've written, and to my shock, it sort of reached more people than I ever expected. And I started, uh, I was reached out to through the blog. So people read what I wrote, and they connected and sent me a few emails, and it blew my mind that people from different parts of the world were connecting to what I was saying. And I realized that the experience that I had could possibly be something that would resonate with another person. And at the same time, I realized that it took me some time to cope with what happened, because I never had the luxury or the sort of space to discuss my mental health, and to discuss what grief was, and to discuss the how I fell into depression and the anxiety that I ended up getting from it, and the PTSD. And it came to a point where even years after what happened, I was still being physically impaired by what it was. I have night sweats from time to time. I wake up suddenly at 3 a.m. thinking that everything is happening again. That entire day was repeating, and I realized that I needed more help, and I did seek that help. I went to therapy, and I tried to figure out what was going on, and I tried my, but it took me a while to think that I should go to therapy. That again kind of stemmed with the kind of stigma it is that exists in our society about mental health. So I waited for so long about a conversation about these things to make me feel less alone and to make me feel less crazy, very frankly, because I started thinking about how it's been 3 4 years and yet I'm still affected the same way. Maybe I've lost my mind. Maybe I've gone crazy. And but again, the more when I started giving myself permission to feel those things and actually look at it in a different way, I realized that I did not have that luxury of discussing mental health the way I should have. And we never had open discussions about these kind of things. And I think, especially in Indian society, you'll see that mental health isn't discussed enough. Forget, scratch discussed enough, it's hardly discussed at all. And so I kept waiting for this conversation to start, and I realized that, you know what, let's just start the conversation myself. And and when I saw the blog had started expanding and it reached a lot of people, I realized that, okay, I'm in the right direction. And I thought of how else can I connect with people. I turned the blog into a podcast as well. So that's how Mind Matters began. So I started the Mind Matters podcast in a hope to have conversations about mental health without people fearing any sort of judgment. So I've been as open as I possibly can. So I've in the episodes that I've released, I've talked about, to the point of what kind of how I reacted when I lost my brother, the journey I went through, the kind of the stages of grief that I went through, and the moment I've been I was blown away by the response actually. I was so many people reached out after the podcast about how sharing the story, it made them more comfortable to share their stories. And that was the basic goal. The idea was to create that sort of sense that if you uh, open up and say that I feel bad about this, I went through this, and that's why my state of mind is like this, and discuss their issues without that judgment, it the moment that conversation starts, you make people feel less alone. And honestly, the moment you hear anyone share a story that is, and you can resonate with even about 5% of what happened, it sort of validates your own experience for yourself, and it validates your own emotions and your experiences, and that makes them feel less alone. It took me some time for me to get that sense of feeling less alone. And once I made peace with what happened, and I'm now coping with it, I've realized that this podcast might be it in I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit selfish. The reason One of the reasons why I started the podcast was it was a coping mechanism for me as well. It's an outlet for me to discuss what's happened, and at the same time it's helping people out there. I'm grateful for it, that people are hearing and are able to resonate with the story. I'm unfortunate, I'm also sorry that they can resonate with the emotions I'm feeling, but at the same time I know what they're feeling. And I know how, if I was told those particular things. So the idea of the podcast is, I'm basically trying to say what I wish I heard when I was in that sort of experience, when I was in that part of my life. If I heard someone tell me that it was okay that I'm feeling the way I am, that it was okay that I was so angry, probably my journey from that point on would have been different. And that was the basic idea. I just wanted to. The goal is, if even one person feels less alone from what I've been doing, I'm making a difference. And I ultimately, that's the goal. I just want people to feel less alone and less ashamed of what they're feeling, because everyone has that right to know that whatever they're feeling is valid, and to give them that validation about their experience and their emotions. That was the basic idea.
Thank you. That's amazing. And I'm sure that everyone on this call has dealt with grief in some capacity and can appreciate that and resonate with that. So I want to open it up now. If anyone on the call has any questions or comments, feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can send something in the chat if you're more comfortable that way. Anyone? Okay, we've received a question in the chat. Were you ever able to find comfort in Hindu religious concepts like moksha or reincarnation when dealing with grief?
So moksha, from what I understood, was the idea of enlightenment, like having those experiences feel like taken off from your mind and sort of releasing those kind of negative thoughts in your this one. In a way, yes, and in a way, no, because at least in my opinion, I don't think I'll ever be over what happened, but it's now sort of like accommodated. It's got its own accommodation in my life, and it's sort of everything I do and everything that's happened, the shadow of what happened is always going to affect my life and what my principles and my thoughts and my decisions in life are. But I have found that the idea of moksha is something that I hope eventually is something I will get to. The ability to be free of that kind of negativity is something I would hope I can reach. But again, I think of it in more of an energy aspect, the negative energy leaving and the positive energy staying.
I said thank you. How did you decide upon the anchor to hold on or rebuild your belief?
So when I realized that I wasn't able to navigate anything in life without having anything to believe in, I realized that I needed something to ground me. And I don't know what it was. There's no sort of particular moment I can define, but I was just drawn to energy. I was drawn to the idea of good energy. For an example, the moment I connected with a certain group of people, the sort of energy that they have, and it sort of affects my everyday mood and my everyday thought process, is when I realized how prominent the concept of energy was in my life. I was drawn to the sort of positivity in my in people, and that started rubbing off on me, and it helped me ground myself. It helped me find a way to tackle the negative thoughts. And when I say tackle the negative thoughts, I'm not talking about throwing them in a box in my head and never looking at it, but facing them without fearing a sort of falling into a dark pit and never coming out. That was the kind of thing that I was drawn to, that energy. So that energy sort of anchored my, brought me, like, it sort of grounded me.
Margit, did you have a question? I see your hands raised. Do you want to unmute yourself? There you are.
There. I am kind of experiencing this secondhand by being in a relationship with somebody who lost their spouse. And how do you move on and expand to new love? To let love in again or believe in a second chance of something. I mean, your experience, it was your brother, so it's a little different, of course, but as somebody who met somebody who is struggling with grief and wants to get out of the past but cannot, and now complicates a current relationship, that is my personal struggle right now. So
Honestly,
how can you not constantly rerun your past, and and it's almost like you are connected to two people, but how do you move with that?
well, in all honesty, when I lost my brother, at the same time, I sort of closed off to all sort of experiences. From the idea of like any sort, I didn't want any sort of relationship with any other human being because I lost the most important person to me. Why bother connecting with anyone else was the kind of idea I had. But at the same time, it's sort of that isolation I brought upon myself. And I realized that when I give myself permission to connect with another person now, it doesn't invalidate what happened. So I came to the point of thinking that if I when I lost my older brother, I'm from a pretty big family. I've got a lot of cousins that are still in my life. But in the start, I didn't want a relationship with anyone else, because for me, I would say it straight to their faces, you're not him and you can never replace him. And I realized that I don't want to replace him. When if I were to give an open idea of that, of allowing someone else to be part of my life, it doesn't undermine his presence in my life. And I it took some time to realize. I think we don't when we go through grief, personally with me, is we don't think rationally in those couple of moments, because in all fairness, we are basically just angry and we don't want to listen to reason. We want to think about, like, can I bargain every other relationship in my life to get that person back? Can I give up something so important to me that I can get this other important thing to back? But the reality is we don't have that sort of barter system in our life. But the moment I sort of allowed myself to think that having any other emotion in my life, any other relationship in my life, doesn't undermine what I had with them, was a breaking point for me. And when I recognized that, I wanted to have another relationship with another family member, or rather to reconnect with my cousins, I had to continuously remind myself that I'm not replacing him. He will always be the most important person in my life. And I think, personally, I feel that, maybe reminding the person that would be important, that you're not trying to replace anyone, that they will always have the same place in their life and the same importance. But reminding them that if you were to allow anyone else in your life, it doesn't undermine what happened, nor does it take away from their presence or importance. And it's sort of like finding a connection through that. I think, again, I'm not any sort of professional or any sort of certified in any way to give this sort of advice in any context. But personally, with me, if I was in that kind of situation, I think the reassurance about how it's not about replacing, and how that memory would never be tainted or would never actually like reduce for having anyone else in your life, was something I would have wanted to hear. And eventually I did reconnect with my family, and now I have cousins that I'm extremely close to again. It took me a while, but I did reconnect. It was, for me, the turning point was understanding that giving myself permission to have a close relationship with another family member, or being close to a cousin again, was not sort of taking away the relationship I had with my brother. That was the turning point for me. So I think it was that reassurance that I'm not replacing him, was what made a difference for me, if that makes any sense.
Oh yes, I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Looks like we have another question in the chat. How much do you think is spirituality helping you presently?
I think spirituality is what keeps me grounded now. Like, from the point of, when I have my bad days, even now, calming myself, when calming myself about any of the bad memories or the bad thoughts. I feel like spirituality for me was to connect to the good energies. So I try to focus on the better memories that I had. So when I have my attacks or my flashbacks about, the worst memory of my life with my brother, I try my best to refocus that energy into better thoughts or other different memories that have a much more positive impact in my thinking and in my mood. So spirituality for me like, again, I feel like spirituality is such a broad concept. It can be defined in so many different ways, and again, it's different for each person about how they would identify it. For me, it would be about connecting to the better memories that give a more positive and good energy for me, if that answers the question.
Please talk about the importance of having an outlet when all kinds of emotions bottle up inside you.
Very important. If the first year or so for me, when I was dealing with my grief, I did not have any outlet, and it sort of built up. I avoided everything. I sort of closed off any feeling. And when eventually I decided to feel again, everything hit me like a tidal wave. So it was everything compounded, and at one go, it hit me. When the reason I find outlets important, it's as simple as this: you keep pushing things back, it's going to push back in about 100 times of a size. So outlets that I've been using to help me has been, one is this particular podcast that I started, and the letters that I've been writing. That has been an outlet for my emotions. But at the same time, I've when I used to have my bad days and my attacks and stuff, I used to have this reflex of just punching walls, and this wasn't a healthy way of dealing with my issues. I would just randomly punch walls, I would punch anything that came in my way. And when I went to therapy and I mentioned that this was what I did, my therapist had realized that because of the anger and the frustration that was built up inside me, I needed a much more physical outlet for me to deal with my issues. And they recommended getting into the getting into mixed martial arts or any sort of controlled fighting sport. So that's what I did. I got into mixed martial arts to find an outlet for my anger. So what she did was is she realized that how I reacted in my bad moments, and tried to formulate a much more healthier way to deal with it. So now when I am frustrated, I do still have the practice of punching things to get my anger out, but now I do it in a much more controlled and safer environment, which to a
Okay.
much more healthier way to deal with my issues. So outlets can be in so many different forms. I know of people who use music as outlets. I know people who use art as outlets. They draw out their feelings, they sing out their emotions, they write. And the more the more we avoid it, it's going to come back to us. And this is not just with emotions, it's basically with anything in our life. Avoiding issues is just it doesn't help. But at the same time, it's terrifying to actually like face it. And in those moments, I've always felt that you should seek help when you can, when you need it, not even when you can, it's when you need it. And I've noticed that people refrain for refrain from seeking help for two reasons: either one, their disbelief of it, or two, what they fear what people will think. And in those moments, I've always thought that what you're doing for yourself and for what you're doing for your own mental health in the journey to continue, uh, that shouldn't be of anyone else's opinion. It should be yours. So I've always given this suggestion to anyone who's asked me about therapy as well. If you want to go to therapy and you want to give it a try, do it. And if the reason that you're like hesitant about it is because you're scared what people will say about it, then don't tell them. It's as simple as that. You do what you have to do for your own health. You don't have to think that by the fact that you're keeping it a secret is because you're ashamed. It's not. Therapy, if you're going to therapy and you're not comfortable with people knowing, you can keep it a secret. You don't have to tell them. And you shouldn't feel that it's like it's because you're ashamed. It's not. They don't have a right, they don't actually have any sort of standing to know. I went to therapy for years before my parents even found out about it, because I didn't think that they needed to know. In my opinion, it was they have their journey that they have to deal with their grief, and I have to do what I need to do to deal with my grief. So I didn't tell them for a good amount of time, and frankly, even now, I don't think they know of all the kind of steps I've taken to deal with my grief. So finding an outlet is important, and if you're not able to find an outlet on your own, seek the help that you need to find that right outlet.
What gave you the strength to keep going?
I personally think that I remember seeing that my brother was someone that took care of everyone around him, and and he was like a protector. He was a protector in my family. He was a protector amongst his friend group. Wherever he was, I always saw him as a protector, and that kind of quality that I saw in him is something that ended up kind of rubbing off on me. So when you ask me what I find the strength to go on for is it's the people around me. Like I said, I'm connected to energy, and the kind of circle that I'm around, and the people that rub off on me. I find that the strength to go on has always been the people around me. I've leaned on people around me, their experiences, what they are to me, and I came to a realization that even if I, on the worst of days, if I can't find a reason to go on for myself, I just think about those people, like the people that I have in my life. uh, I don't want to give up just yet, because I still want to see what they're going to do in their life. It's not even about if I make a difference to them, if my existence is in their life makes a difference or not. It's about how I don't want to miss out on them, and I don't want to miss out on their energy. That's the kind of mindset that I sort of started practicing, and that's kind of what helped me keep going on, and it still does.
You mentioned that you were drawn to sort of words of affirmation or sayings to
Yeah.
give you sort of meaning. Would you equate that in any way to like a mantra? And do you have any sort of ritualistic practice like that in your own life?
Yes, a mantra for sure. So a particular mantra that I continue to repeat to myself is "on to better things." So "on to better things" kind of helps me, like especially in those moments when I'm beyond in control of, like when I'm not in control of my thoughts, and when it's like the bad is just flooding in into my head. I try my best to literally repeat the words "on to better things." On to better things help me to, like, for me, on to better things is to get out of those moments when I've lost control, and getting out of those little episodes is how I'm able to, once I'm out of those episodes, I can refocus my energy. But in those episodes, the mantra that I use is "on to better things." And I've also noticed there's this quote by Robin Williams about how the saddest people in life are the ones that try the hardest to make people smile, because they know what it is to feel alone, and they don't want anyone else to feel alone. It's something on those lines. I'm not quoting it exactly, but I've always resonated with those words for some reason, and I sort of realized that that was something what I ended up doing in life. I did not, it wasn't intentional, but it became about making people around me happy. And it was like, if I could spread that kind of energy, that eventually that sort of energy would even sort of consume me. The more positive, good energy, as much as I can spread it, it would eventually sort of blanket me also.
Thank you. So we're at about an hour right now. So I want to start wrapping up. Be mindful of your time and of everyone's time. But were there any last questions or comments that anyone had that they would like to share? Okay. Well, then I was wondering, could you share the link to your podcast or ways that people can follow you if they want to?
Yeah, of course. If you were to look up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatsoever, you will find that you will get the link to my podcast. It's basically Mind Matters, MINDMATTERS by Sneha Nambyar. And if you go to my Instagram, which is sneha.ksd, you will find the link to my website. So the website has both the links to all the podcast episodes as well as even the blog posts that I've been maintaining all this while. So the blogs are in a format of letters. So I basically write letters to anyone who wants to read about the journey. So I've discussed concepts of like from what it is that what the idea of believing in something to stages of grief to the kind how kindness is so important when it comes to mental health and all sorts of things like this. So Mind Matters on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if you just go to my Instagram on sneha.ksd, it's a public profile, anyone can find it, and you'll find the link to my website on the in the bio.
Thank you so much. And I did put the Instagram handle in the chat, so anyone can look that up and follow you. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your story and just being vulnerable and just having this open conversation about grief and faith and mental health. Thank you to everyone on the call who joined us today. And I hope that you have a great rest of your afternoon if you're in the US, and I guess evening. Good night if you're in India. So did you have any final closing words or thoughts, something you want to leave the audience with?
Just a thank you to you actually for giving me a chance to speak and also for the work you do. I think it's so important to have these conversations that are quite uncomfortable for some people, but at the same time equally important. The more we converse, the more we can learn and understand. It's important because the reality of life is we're going to have to unlearn a few things to continue and also learn of new things to ensure that there's some sort of peace in ourselves, in our lives around us, whatever it is. And I'm truly, truly grateful for an opportunity to speak with you.
Well, I'm so grateful for you saying that, and I hope we can continue working together in the future. So it was
Yes.
wonderful to meet you and to have you, and thank you to everyone for joining us. So I hope you all have a great day or evening. All right.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.